Well, here we are live on this Memorial Day evening, 7 o'clock. Joe Chaffee and Joe Rayo on the Joe and Joe Weather Show. Hope you enjoyed the third day of the holiday weekend, which, Mr. Rayo, was so strange because I woke up this morning what was
Yes.
that?
Once again, YouTube is running behind, and
Okay. I woke up this morning at 6:30, pouring rain out. Pouring rain.
wow.
Yeah, there's some stuff. And I grabbed my phone and I pulled up the radar, and it was all this low top stuff that rotated back westward around the surface low that was offshore. Which, if you looked at the satellite loop this morning or during the day, was pretty well defined. Well, this little batch, all low top stuff on the radar. If you looked at the radar, it looked as if it was just a Virga and it wasn't. I mean, I'm exaggerating slightly when I say pouring rain, but it did come down hard for a short period of time, and then I did what most that any normal person would do under that instance, and just go back to sleep. And I wound up, I wound up sleeping till after 8 o'clock, which is something I haven't done in months and months. Then sat in low clouds and mist and fog. I went up to the beach around 1 or 2 o'clock. I had written a post around noontime, thinking that, you know what, this it's probably going to be hard pressed to break out, which of course meant that it just went wide open, blue sky and sunshine. By the time it got to about 2:30, 3 o'clock, it broke out wide open. But it was just such a weird day because this really should have been more like yesterday was, which turned out to be pretty nice in most places.
Well, it turned out very nice here because we broke out by mid or late morning yesterday. In fact, when we did our Sunday morning show, I was lamenting the fact that I was suggesting it would be a rather dreary looking day, and it turned out to be beautiful at 11 o'clock. Today, it took a little longer for that to happen, and in fact, I'm not even sure if we had a trace of precipitation up my way because even my wife looked out the window and said, "Did it rain?" I said the ground looks a little wet, but a little damp. But it did break out. We did get some sunshine, and it turned out to be a very nice afternoon. And probably we'll see the same thing happen, I guess, tomorrow and again on Wednesday.
And this is gonna, yeah, it's probably gonna run the same, the same thing. I just think it might, maybe it'll break out, whatever low clouds that form tonight with this little coastal low that's out there that's just gonna weaken and fall apart. It probably should burn off a little faster. I
It
would
should.
think it
But
should.
later tonight, we're going to see again low clouds come in probably after
Some
midnight,
patchy fog.
patchy fog, and then we'll rinse and repeat again for tomorrow. It looks like, and probably I think Wednesday.
Also, this is going to be a bit strange this week because your highest temperatures, and they're going to reach up above 90 in northern New England. It's actually going to be the warmest. It's going to be far warmer in northern New England than it will be down here in the northern Mid-Atlantic states and into southern New England because of a couple of things that are occurring. One is the position of the upper high. It's going to mean for west winds across northern New England, both at the surface and aloft. There's no cold front that's going to come through in northern areas until later Friday or Friday night, and that means that you basically reheat the same air all week long. So you're going to get downslope going on as well. So you're going to see some numbers up. Maybe some places might get to 94 or 5, I think, in parts of Maine, which doesn't happen often. And it's just it is a bit of an unusual setup that we're seeing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And as far as that cold front is concerned, still SPC storm. Well, you're probably going to show it in a few moments, but the Storm Prediction Center is still indicating that predictability for any kind of severe activity, even though they mention it in the discussion
Right.
uh, on the actual maps, they don't have anything for Friday or Saturday, at least not just yet.
But do they? I didn't look. Do they have probability too low or predictability too low?
Predictability.
All right, so predictability means that you know what, it could happen, but we're just not exactly sure
Right.
enough to draw a risk area.
Right.
As opposed to probability is too low, just basically means there's little or no chance.
Right.
So they are acknowledging that there are possibilities here. So, and the other thing I want to talk about tonight is we're going to take a look at the tropics at some point because we still seem to be dealing with this condition across the across the Western Caribbean and into the southern parts of the Gulf of Mexico, where pressures are going to be running low over the next week or 10 days. So whether something comes out of there or not remains to be seen, but I think it's something worth taking a look at. And I would just, ignore whatever the models are saying with regards to this because they're just the GFS in particular is just it's doing its usual nonsense in the day 10 to 16 time frame. And although it does have some stuff going on inside the 10-day time frame, but we'll take a look at that. I'm going to bring up the loop tonight because it kind of shows what happened going back to this afternoon. You could see the clouds that broke up. If I had this loop running back a bit longer, you would notice that the cloud cover was fairly widespread around 10 or 11 o'clock this morning, covered most of Pennsylvania and on up through the Hudson Valley and into New England. But it did burn off, and in many areas, some areas less so than others, but most areas did burn off in the Hudson Valley down to Long Island. Now, we are seeing a little bit of the cloudiness starting to work back westward from off the ocean. You can look at the last few frames, and you're seeing some clouds backing westward. So that's some of that nighttime stuff that's going to be rolling in. But other than that, yeah, it's pretty quiet. It's pretty quiet. No rain in there. So I'm hoping that there's no rain tonight. I don't want another surprise, particularly because I didn't mention that there might be another surprise. So,
I used to call those when I was in television. I used to call those Gomer piles. I would go on the air. I'd say, "Don't worry about it. We'll just get a trace of snow." Wake up the next morning, 3, 4 inches are on the ground, and then I'd hear Jim Neighbors' voice in the back of my head: "Surprise!
surprise,
Surprise!
surprise,
Surprise!"
surprise.
Yeah.
That's right. All right, so let's go around the horn and look at what's happening this evening, and let's bring up our surface map with current conditions. So this is going to be another situation, at least for eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England, as we go through this week. It's going to be warmer inland than it's going to be at the coast. So
Right.
there's no question of that. You're going to see temperatures that are going to make it into the 80s if you're west of. It might even make it to about New York City, but certainly west of New York City. If you're west of the immediate coast and inland, those areas are probably going to get to 80 or a bit better. We certainly saw some temperatures as we're seeing this evening in parts of southeast PA, for example. We've got readings. Allentown's at 75. Reading is at 77. Harrisburg is at just west of Harrisburg in Big Knob, Pennsylvania. It is 79, and it's in the low and mid 70s down in Maryland and northeastern Virginia. And of course, you go up the Hudson Valley and go into Connecticut, because if you go into Connecticut and into in New England, where there's still some cloud cover, it's mostly mid 60s to maybe near 70. But meanwhile, you go up to upstate New York today. Buffalo right now at 7 o'clock is 82. Just to the east of Buffalo and Genesee County Airport is 86. So
Hmm.
it's very warm in western New York, and that's part of part of that. Uh, just what I described earlier with regards to how this is all setting up. Those areas well inland, Joe, are not really as much as susceptible to the low clouds and the influence of the ocean. So they're going to do a lot better in terms of temperatures than the immediate coastal areas will over the next couple of days.
Oh yeah, there'll be a broad range of temperatures in southern New England, Cape Cod, the islands, Nantucket, Martha's Vineyard. They're going to be a good anywhere from 10 to 20 degrees cooler, as opposed to areas that are not really too far away to the north and to the northwest in inland spots. And similarly here in the lower Hudson Valley, along the sound shore of Westchester, probably at best low 70s. the next couple of days. But you go up toward, let's say, Poughkeepsie or Kingston, 80 to 85 easily.
Mm.
So,
You're right now in Maine. I'm just looking. Temperatures in northern Maine are in the low and mid 70s.
hmm,
In southern Maine, right along the coast, it's mostly low and mid 50s.
right.
So the wind is coming in off the water, but you start to move up into northern Maine and you start to see more of a west wind or a west southwest wind. Although it's there seems to be some variability. I'm even seeing some areas showing a light south wind, but it's a much warmer wind as you go further inland than it is obviously along the coast. And you head down into the mid-Atlantic states, and we moved down into Washington and I'm sorry, into Maryland and Virginia, and temperatures there, we're not seeing 80s there today. We're seeing temperatures mostly in the 70s, and again, one of the big issues with regards to the Mid-Atlantic states, also at least along the coast, dealing with some clouds, some low clouds that are backing in westward. Meanwhile, Joe, there's a lot of tropical moisture that's up over the state of Florida and in the southeast, and they've gotten quite a bit of rain in South Florida, enough that they've been dealing with flash flood watches and also a couple of severe thunderstorm warnings that popped up during the day today. But that's part of a weak system that moved out of the Northwest Caribbean and is moving northward over Florida. More than likely, this area should fall apart. I would get concerned about that moisture moving northward as the week goes on. It really shouldn't. I mean, maybe some of the clouds might, but and the rain should stay away. But there've been a couple of hints on a few runs where it was trying to bring some showers up around midweek, but they don't seem to get much further north than, say, Maryland and Virginia. So as long as that's the case, we should be all right. But I just want to keep just a little side eye on this area that's down in Florida right now. And I'll bring up the radar so you can see how where the rain is, and it's been coming down pretty good in South Florida. Much of it has shifted a bit further north this afternoon and this evening, mostly in North Florida, but they're still getting some heavy rains in spots.
I have not had a chance really to take a look at the forecast for Central Florida for the Space Coast, as it's called, for Wednesday, because, of course, now national headlines are beginning to highlight more and more the first launch of a manned space vehicle from America's soil in almost a decade, and that's due at 4:33 on Wednesday afternoon. But of course, that ain't happening if there are any showers and thunderstorms in the vicinity of Cape Canaveral on Wednesday afternoon.
Well, we'll have to take a look and see. Meanwhile, well to the west in the Ohio Valley, and of course up and through the southern central plains. We're seeing some showers and storms. We do have a little bit of severe weather risk going on tonight. The Storm Prediction Center showing a slight risk of severe weather from. I'll just freshen this up to see if they've updated. I mean, that was yesterday's map that you just saw, but this is today's. So slight risk in South Texas, going westward. So that includes Corpus Christi, San Antonio, and Brownsville, and all the way back to Del Rio, and then up northward toward Midland, Odessa, and Lubbock. Meanwhile, also a slight risk in easternmost Oklahoma, western Arkansas, southwest Missouri, and we do have some heavy showers and storms that are moving northward right now on the radar. They become a little more scattered as you go further north into the marginal risk that goes all the way up the Mississippi Valley up to Wisconsin. There is also marginal risk in southeast Florida. And over the next couple of days, just to give it a view, by the way, tornado risk is also fairly high in all of this, relatively speaking. You're looking at, let me just back up again, the tornado risk for today is 2% in that area of risk that runs through the middle Mississippi Valley, 5% in parts of Texas, 2% in southern Florida. For tomorrow, we're looking at severe weather risk in a couple of small areas up in Wisconsin and Iowa and southeast Minnesota, South Texas, and also coastal South Carolina in a marginal risk of severe weather. Day 3, which is Wednesday into Thursday, there are no severe weather risks indicated. And then, as you pointed out, on the day 4 to 8, which I'll bring up right now, uh, which is taking forever to load. There we go. So here's day 4 to 8. So looking at day 4, day 5, predictability too low. Day 5 is Friday into Saturday. So that's the time frame we probably will be looking at with regards to severe weather risk here. But right now they're just saying predictability too low, which, as we said earlier, that just means that they see the risk, but they can't quantify it yet.
Right. And I think that for us, the time frame to watch will be Friday night late into the early hours of Saturday morning. The front should be moving through on Saturday. It's not going to be moving very fast, however, so we may have lots of lingering clouds until later Saturday. But then Sunday and Monday look really, really nice with lots of sunshine, lower humidity, and more pleasant temperatures. And in fact, Joe, I don't know if you noticed it on the European for Sunday night into Monday, our thickness drops below 540.
Well, that's a pretty no, nice. That's a fairly strong upper trough that's coming through the Great Lakes and Northeast. It's not quite as deep as some of the ones we saw in May, but for late May, earlier in May, but for late May, very beginning of June, it's not too shabby. So
No,
that also adds a little bit of firepower to the possibility that there could be a little bit of severe weather risk because of that upper trough coming through. The surface map tonight, Joe, kind of shows the problem here. When you want skies to really just sort of clear out and just see some great weather, you want weather systems to be a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more developed. So they have the machinery to clean house. But when we look at this, the pressure pattern across the Northeast is pretty weak. You have a weak low out offshore. There's no real strong high anywhere, nor is there any very intense low that's driving all of this. It's just a sort of very weak flow, and that especially right along the coast, you got this weak higher pressures that are sitting east of Nova Scotia, and they're just kind of wedged in a little bit into southern New England and down into the Mid-Atlantic states. So with that very weak low that's east of North Carolina, you're getting this sort of throwback of low clouds. It kind of makes sense. So we have to just kind of wait for this to go away and get into a decent southwest flow. That may not happen until late in the week. So we'll probably still have those low cloud issues to deal with. And meanwhile, there's no sign of the next cold front yet. It's not even on the scene. You see the frontal boundary that runs from a low in Minnesota down through Oklahoma and into Texas. Now there's your severe weather trigger for today. Dew points in East Texas, for example, on up into Oklahoma and Arkansas. We're seeing dew points in the middle and upper 60s with temperatures into the 70s, at least as of 2 p.m. Let's see if I got the 21Z. Usually by now the 21Z is out, and it is. And that weather front in Texas is now pushed further east. So behind it, it's nice and dry back in West Texas. Dew points down in the 50s and 40s, which is pretty good. Meanwhile, in Florida, Joe, we've got temperatures all in the low 70s, dew points all in the low 70s, and just rain with very little sun today with all that cloud cover with this. There's very weak low pressure here. It's hard to define. There's no real close circulation. It's something, in terms of a tropical depression, we don't have anything like that. But it's a bit of a tropical disturbance that's moving northward that's doing all this.
and you mentioned about dew point temperatures. I could see our dew points, Joe, perhaps Wednesday, but certainly Thursday and Friday in the low to mid 60s. And that will add for the potential firepower, possible severe weather here, juicy air, if you will, as that cold front approaches late Friday and Friday night, with those dew point temperatures in the 60s, uh, afternoon temperature, especially inland, afternoon temperatures in the 80s. So even though the folks at the Storm Prediction Center are saying right now predictability too low, I just have that feeling that a large swath of the Northeast is going to be in line for at least a slight chance of severe weather come Friday and maybe into early Saturday as well.
All right, so we've got WPC's rainfall forecast here for the Northeast, and again, This is all going to be for Friday night and Saturday because that really is when the next chance of any significant rain that's forecast for eastern Pennsylvania to southern New England anyway, and on the order of say a half an inch to an inch and a quarter, inch and a half maybe in some places. Also through upstate New York and western PA, nothing's going to happen of consequence until late in the week. You do have, because of the tropical disturbance, some 3 to inch plus rains being indicated for parts of coastal South and North Carolina, but that only reaches up into southeastern Virginia in terms of the max area. And then you also have a max area in western North and South Carolina and northeastern Georgia. Now, this is an area that got heavy rains last week, so we'll probably want to pay a little bit of attention here. I think the flooding potential is kind of low, and also some heavy rains in parts of Arkansas, eastern Oklahoma, down into southeast Louisiana. I'm going to bring up the watches and warnings tonight. We do have flash flood watches up for much of the east coast of Florida and in South Florida. Also, northeast from East Texas and Northwest Louisiana northward up into western Missouri and eastern Kansas and southeastern Nebraska. So that's, and we also have a working tornado watch up. You should just take a quick look at that. Let's just see what they're doing. I think it just may have just gone up. Uh, let's check out SPC. Yeah, they just went up with a tornado watch about 14 minutes ago for parts of Arkansas and Oklahoma. And that's inside that area of slight risk. And of course, you've got those big storms on the radar. Let's give this a refresh. The storms that are in southwest Arkansas and eastern Oklahoma are moving northward. So it's from that we're seeing severe weather risks for tonight. And by the way, Joe, the other thing I want to mention is in the Southwest and in California, Southern and Central California, we've got a very large area where they've got excessive heat warnings up, going from southern Arizona all the way up into Northern California. So it kind of makes sense given the pattern that we're in, more of a ridge in the west and more troughing in the east in general. So that's where your heat is in the west.
In the West, and also, as you just pointed out at the onset here, central and northern New England, inland, the heat is, although not the kind of extreme or excessive heat of, let's say, 110, 115 that they're seeing out in the Southwest, but still, if you're up in Caribou or Presque Isle or Madawaska, northern sections of Maine,
Matahuska.
they hit Madawaska, they hit 90 degrees. That's pretty hot this early in the season. I do hope that the 100 plus inches of snow that Caribou received from this past winter are all but gone now with
Oh,
those
of course it is.
temperatures.
So tomorrow, mostly mid 80s up in northern Maine, upper 60s and low 70s in southern Maine. If you look through, I've got the high temperatures for tomorrow across New Hampshire, Vermont, middle and upper 80s up there, and in upstate New York, also north central and northeastern New York, middle and upper 80s. Along I 90, places like Albany, 87, Utica, 88, Syracuse, 89, Rochester, 88, Buffalo, 86. So again, if you look at, we're going to take a look at the upper air just to show you, why this is how this is. It is what it is. Why it is what it is. Wednesday, pretty much the same story. You start to see some 90-degree readings showing up in parts of Vermont and New Hampshire, and also in Maine, a few 90s there. And then we go into Thursday. Cools off a little bit, so now you're starting to lose that westerly flow, and the flow becomes more southwesterly, so the temperatures drop off a little bit. But meanwhile, Joe, you look at down our area here again in comparison. Along the coast, 70s, immediate coast probably 60s, southeast New England 60s. You move into places like the Hudson Valley, the lower Hudson Valley, middle to upper 70s, western New Jersey, southeastern PA down into northeast Virginia, mostly lower 80s. So it's a little weird to see the warmer temperatures further north as opposed to the other way around. But sometimes it sets up that way. And of course, if you go west, you're seeing temperatures in the 80s across the Ohio Valley into western Pennsylvania, and obviously, as we mentioned too, into western New York. But it's that it's where the high is offshore. This partial flow off the ocean that we're dealing with is really the driving force in terms of keeping temperatures semi reasonable here, and by northern New England standards, I would say semi unreasonable there.
Yes. To unreasonable for this time of the year, those high temperatures are a little bit. I can accept this in July and August, but we're not even to June officially yet, so they are a bit unreasonable.
Right. So you look at the NAM. I got the NAM 500, the upper air. So here's your ridge along the East Coast. It's like the upper high is probably somewhere off the New Jersey coast. Your largest departures of normal in terms of the pressures and the heights are up in Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, upstate northeastern New York, and in southeastern Canada. So this is where you're going to see your biggest departures from normal. Okay, whereas you get down further south, your temperatures are going to be closer to normal, and of course you're looking at this upper low that's sitting down in East Texas. Inside, underneath that upper low, temperatures are actually going to be a bit below average, but the atmosphere is a bit of in a bit of an upside down mode. And as we go through the week, of course, eventually what happens is the flow does become more southwesterly in New England, and the upper low that's back in Texas begins to open up, and you also begin to see come Friday the upper trough in the northern part of the jet stream, and that's going to bring that cold front through here that we're talking about for late this week.
Yes, and that again, somewhat questionable right now, but there's a fair chance with all the humidity and the warm temperatures that we might be looking at a swath of possible severe activity in parts of the Northeast for later Friday into early Saturday, and we will wait, watch, and see.
Here's the GFS now. We'll go in the longer range. The upper trough in the north. There's a little upper low that's north of Minnesota. That if I can get this darn thing to move. Hello. Ah, that's because it's the NAM. Hold on. Let me get the GFS up. Like, why is it not going beyond 84 hours? But watch that upper. That upper trough is it ain't too shabby. It comes on through here. It starts to move through here on Sunday, so ahead of it. One of the things that GFS is doing is it kind of hangs that front up a little bit so that it actually fires up some thunderstorms here during Saturday. I'm not 100% sure about that.
Right, right,
But basically, what the model is suggesting that you're going to get this initial push. If you look carefully here, on Friday afternoon, there's a short wave that is moving through the central lake. So that probably triggers off a lead line of storms. All right, I can kind of understand that. Okay, I get that. But there's a second short wave that is behind it, coming into Minnesota and just passing Lake Winnipeg. And that is going to move on. That is the one that swings through and gets a little bit closer on Saturday. So maybe the GFS is kind of giving you the idea. Here's your upper trough by Saturday evening, right in. Come on, draw for me. Uh, There we go. So there's your upper trough on Saturday. So essentially, what the GFS is saying is that the front is just going to wait. Is going to have to wait till that second upper trough comes along and pushes it through. Meanwhile, you got this big upper high in New Mexico that's built all the way up into Montana, up the Rockies, and into the Canadian Northwest, which is going to favor some cooler air coming down to the east. And here you see it. Come Monday of next week, Joe, you got a nice, really strong northwest flow coming out of central Canada. Brings down, I would think that would bring down some cooler air at least for a couple of days.
right. Well, as I noted a few minutes ago, I mean, 540 is usually the line that we use for snow prediction. Anything below 540 generally is snow. That's at the higher level of the atmosphere, like 18,000 feet. But to see that even this late in the season is very unusual and signifies that the flow of air is going to be rather coolish for this time of the year. So early next week, look for temperatures once again back below seasonal normals.
All right, so here's the GFS, and we're watching again. Just let's just keep a side eye on that stuff over Florida and into the southeast. More than likely, it never really amounts to anything. You see on by Wednesday night, there's a little bit of precip there, eastern North Carolina on up into western Pennsylvania, as the GFS shows, but it never really organizes into anything wholesale that moves all the way up the coast. You notice the isobars, by the way, they go from being mostly southeast to south and then eventually to southwest by the time we get to Friday. So that at least will cut the ocean off. Then here's your front Friday evening, triggering off some showers and thunderstorms with that lead shortwave. You've got this big high, almost a 1027 high at Lake Winnipeg, but you're waiting for that second shortwave to come, and this is where the GFS suddenly fires up what looks like some showers and storms from coastal Maine down to about your house, eastern Pennsylvania, West Virginia, eastern Kentucky. That's the second shortwave. Is kind of going to be the main push with some showers and storms. We get those through here for Saturday, and then you get this cool high that comes in for Sunday and Monday. And then after that, it goes out, and it looks like it tries to warm up again. And then we'll probably have a couple of fronts to deal with. Now
Well,
let's see. Go
at
ahead.
least everything is at least everything is progressive. I mean, the worst situation, and I've seen it happen, as I'm sure you have too, as early as late May or early June, is the atmosphere just becoming so stagnant that nothing moves for
Right.
days, and you end up with one day after another of heat, haze, humidity. At least we will see a bit of humidity and a bit of heat mid and late week, especially. But at least everything is moving, and those fronts coming through over the weekend will help to stir things up, so to speak.
Now, I've got the Gulf of Mexico and the Caribbean and the Southwest Atlantic view up, and as we go through, as we get to next weekend, now we'll see if this is going to happen or not. One of the things we see is the something that develops south of Central America on the Pacific side, and it's actually drawn northward into the Western Caribbean. That doesn't happen very often, where you get a tropical system. I mean, it happens sometimes, but not very often. But it does represent the fact that you have what seems to be lower than normal pressures that are going to be developing across the Caribbean and maybe even into the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. And the GFS tries to fire up on a week from now some kind of low in the Northwest Caribbean and another one in the Central Caribbean. Again, I would just kind of focus on the fact that with higher pressures up to the north, off the Mid Atlantic, and lower pressures further south down into the Gulf states, it does open the door to something possibly developing here. Now, whether it does or doesn't remains to be seen. GFS keeps insisting on this. It never really brings, but once again, it leaves everything down there until after day 10 or 11, and then once again on this run it fires up. This is something we talked about yesterday. There seems to be some kind of built-in error in the model where it keeps wanting to show these tropical systems, and if we're going to start dealing with it now, we're going to have to be dealing with it all hurricane season, where it starts to fire up these systems after day 10. And as you and I well know, I would say, 24 out of 25 times that it does that, it winds up not happening. Joe, you there? Did you freeze up on me? Joseph? Oh, there you
Are
go.
you there?
Yeah, you temporarily
Yeah.
froze up.
So did you.
I just got a message that said my internet connection is unstable.
Uh-oh.
Well, we're both back, so whatever's happening seems to have calmed down, which is a good thing.
Right.
YouTube is not getting a message here. You're not receiving enough video to maintain smooth streaming. As such, viewers will experience buffering. So those of you watching tonight, and we don't have a big crowd tonight, which is understandable given the holiday. Just if you're seeing some buffering, there are some internet issues that are underway. So I was just basically saying that while the models continue to show lower than normal pressures in the tropics, you and I both know that 99 times. Well, I said 24 out of 25 times. It's probably maybe a fairer ratio, but 24 out of 25 times it doesn't happen. So until it does, you're just going to have to prove it to me. Uh,
Maybe it's something. Maybe it's something in the algorithm. After 10 days, it just automatically starts
Putting a
projecting.
category 5 because it
Yeah.
has to.
All
But
right.
the whole
Well,
idea of lower than normal pressures seems to be a running theme, so I'm going to go with it. The upper air certainly to me suggests that you would probably have lower than normal pressures down in that region, but we shall see. We'll deal with it when we get there.
and may I also thank Rick Cortez, Cortese or Cortez? I should know. It's
Cortez, either
Cortez
way,
for kicking into our um, tip jar or super chat jar or whatever you want to call it jar.
yeah, it's a super chat jar. Thank you very much, Joe, and I appreciate it greatly. I'm not seeing it yet.
No, that was a while back, Joe.
Oh, really? Was it earlier?
Oh yeah, it was.
Oh, I see it. There it is. Um, Yeah, it did. I guess because of the internet hit, there's just a delay in it showing it up. But thank you, Nick. Joe and I both appreciate it greatly. And again, hope everybody had a great a great holiday weekend, and hope everybody took just a little bit of time to remember those who have fought for our freedoms here in our great nation. And a moment of silence at some point before the day is out is certainly a good idea. So
Right.
let's get to some Briller Jeopardy here with the I got to go back to last Friday because he left me some stuff for Friday.
Okay.
Uh, I got to find it. No, I did. We did this, didn't we?
Well, we did a bunch of Jeopardy yesterday, so
Yeah.
we're,
Did we do the what was the highest water temperature ever recorded on the
yes,
steel pier? So we
Atlantic
did
Day.
all
Yeah.
that. Okay, gotcha.
Yes.
Um. All right. So I thought we did do those, unless there's another bunch that we didn't do. Let's go back. Let me go back. Uh, Oh,
All right.
okay, here we go. This is the ones I didn't do. What are the highest and lowest all-time temperatures in the following cities? San Diego, San Francisco, St. Paul.
Okay.
Let's start with San Diego.
San Diego, I could see them getting up to something like 108 degrees for the high,
111,
111, and the lowest temperature they ever got down to, I'd say about 37.
25.
How is that possible?
I
That
don't
they got
know.
down to
That's what it
25
says.
degrees?
That's what it says. San
Wow.
Francisco.
San Francisco. Well, I'll tell you what, if San Diego got down to 25, I'll say something similar for San Francisco. I'll say 20, 24.
27.
All right.
And the
And
high?
the high, I would say for San Francisco, 105.
Very good. 106.
Okay.
And the lowest and highest for St. Paul,
St.
Minnesota.
The highest in St. Paul. St. Paul could get hot.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen hot temperatures there. Why don't we say for St. Paul 103,
108.
108, and the lowest temperature, good God, how low could they go? Minus minus 42.
I would have thought it would have been in the minus 40s, but it's actually minus 34.
All right.
I would have thought it would have been a little lower. I would have guessed minus 40 or more.
Thank you to thank you to Carl Weitz for hitting the super
Super
chat.
chat. All right, thank you, Carl. We really appreciate it. So I'm trying to think. How was your day today? Everything went all right?
Yeah, everything went fine. During this afternoon, I had the gumption to take a bird feeder, which I've had for a number of years and never got around to putting up. And I started putting the bird feeder up. I attached it to the play set. Our play set, and of course now my kids, quote unquote, my kids are respectively almost 30 and 27. So it's been a while since the play set has been used.
Well, you save them for the grandbabies when they come
Well,
one day.
when they finally come, I don't think we're going to be here. And that play set is starting to get a little, well, the wood is starting to get rather soft.
Right, right.
So I decided
Understandable.
to attach this this bird feeder to the play set, and It's a special one with these springs, so that if the squirrel tries to leap onto it, the food door closes. That kind of stuff. So
I
hopefully,
had something like that, and the squirrels just basically laughed at it. You know, they're so crafty. They really they just find a way. They just find a way. Although I will tell you, there's a hawk in my neighborhood, and he took a squirrel the other day.
oh boy,
He took a squirrel and he took it up in the air, big hawk, took it up in the air and dropped it. Because I guess they do that sometimes to just kind of, take it out of its misery before they rip it apart.
right,
Except that the squirrel unfortunately landed on the grass, so it didn't quite do the job. Although the squirrel was so stunned it didn't run away, so the hawk came down, and there was a lot of people apparently saw this, so they were sort of standing around watching it. The hawk just kind of took the squirrel and then stayed on the ground for a while, uh, and the squirrel's squirming underneath its talons. But it was very, it was watching nature at its
at its
at
best.
its best, I guess, if you want to call it that. But yeah, it's well, you know what? The squirrel's got a family to feed, but so does the hawk, because they're
Right.
raising their babies. Now all the birds are.
I told you the story about my daughter and the ant.
No,
When my daughter was 4 years old, we're walking together after she came off of the school bus. We're walking together and we looked down and there was a gigantic carpenter ant and it was holding something in its hand. This What are these white things that you see sometimes with the carpenter ant? Is it food or
might be
anyway?
a larvae.
It might be
They
something
might
like
be moving.
Anyway,
New construction.
and my daughter, who knows that try to kill ants when they see them, especially big ones, she goes over and she stomps on the ant, right?
Right.
And I look at her and I have a frown on my face and I say, "Do you realize what you've just done?" And she looks at me like quizzically, like what? I said, "You just that was the daddy ant carrying the food that he was bringing home to the mommy ant
Oh my
and
God, you really laid it on thick,
the
did you?
right?" And she immediately like, "Ah!" And she ran into the house. And my wife comes out. She said, "What did you do to her? What did you say?" It gave her like a complex. And every time my daughter and I see a carpenter, and I said, "Look, there's the," and she said, "Shut up, Dad."
Well, the carpenter ants in my old house were union.
Yeah,
They wore the hard hats. They put the
right,
sawhorses up. They were kind of busy.
right.
I tell you something. They from where they were, they actually in the grass. There was a path. There was a defined. It was maybe about 2 inches, 2 or 3 inches wide, but there was a path 2 or 3 inches wide where there was no grass. That's the road that they basically took. So they cleaned it up, you know. And of course, the town came and tried to tax it. They put, an easement and pavement, and people were complaining. The other ants were complaining there are no curbs here, there's no sidewalks.
I've got to find it for you on an old time. I'm into old time radio, and there was a program that CBS ran for many years called Suspense, and there
Mm,
was one particular episode of about these giant ants. The ants were about as large as your thumb, covering an area like 2 miles wide by 10 miles long, and they were approaching this was in South America, and the guy who owned the complex refused to move, and he was going to fight it out with the ants, and these were like deadly. And it's a very very interesting radio drama. I'm going to find it. I'll send it to you, and then maybe tomorrow, Wednesday, you could put it on the chat board, and anybody who wants to listen to it, it's a riveting show, and one where it's not for the faint of heart either.
well, we should do that.
Yes.
This morning on Perry Mason, because they're now back into season one. The uh, it was the case of the angry accomplice, and one of the the actresses is a very well, two actresses of note. First off, the woman that was eventually arrested for murder was Mrs. Wilson in Dennis the Menace.
Oh, really?
Yeah, now was that
Martha.
Gloria Henry
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
that played
Martha.
Mrs. Wilson?
Martha.
Yes.
That was
Um,
Joseph Kearns, of course, was the original Mr. Wilson. And once Joseph Kearns died and Gail Gordon came in as the quote brother,
yeah, they wrote
the
her
new Mr.
out.
Wilson, they pushed her around. They brought up a new Mrs. Wilson.
Right. So she was the person that Perry had to defend. And
Well, of
what
course, she'd be the murderer.
what's
Mrs.
that?
Wilson would be. You
No,
think
she
that
could.
she would be the murderer?
She
No,
couldn't be the murderer. She's too
no.
mild. Was too mild mannered. Um, but and she wasn't. This other person was not the murderer or the murderess. But it was a very very young Barbara Eden.
You posted that on Facebook. The,
Yes, I did.
the pictures of Barbara Eden as a, and I guess this was right around the same time that she made her
Her I
appearance.
Love Lucy debut. That I Love Lucy was her apparently her debut
Right,
as Diana.
right. Buenos Dias Senior.
Right, Bonus Dias Senior. Um, well, anyway, yeah. So it was very, very young. She didn't have a whole lot of lines, uh, but you could see it. Yeah, but she's just, and she's also, has a shorter haircut. Not a lot. Wasn't wearing a lot of makeup in the character that she was playing. Uh, but very what that's a big plus of that show is the fact that you get to see a lot of actors that you recognize, that you and
Right,
I recognize certainly.
right. You
Um, you
recognize
know,
him to the point where from other TV shows where you say, "Oh, look, there's uh, Mr. Drucker,
right,
and look, there's Commissioner Gordon."
right.
In the same
Neil Hamilton.
episode. Yeah.
Neil
Last
Hamilton.
night, last night on the Twilight Zone at midnight, they ran the episode about the bet between a man who bet another guy that he couldn't stay
Oh,
silent
Silence. Yes.
for an entire year, and the lawyer for the guy who made the bet was Jonathan Harris, Dr. Smith.
Yes. Exactly.
Yeah.
Jonathan Harris. And the guy winds up going through the whole year, and then he screws it up at the very end.
Well, he does stay silent, but then the guy he made the bet with for $500,000, the guy who made the bet said, "I don't have $500,000. I was willing to give you 1,000 or 5,000, but I don't have anywhere near five." And he decides he's going to resign from the club, quote unquote. And then when they asked the guy who hasn't spoken in a year why he isn't saying
He
anything,
cut his tongue out.
no, he cut his vocal cords, or the
Oh.
nerve endings to his vocal cords, which
Oh.
and my grandfather actually had
Oh.
to have a laryngectomy where he had his vocal cords removed, and he had to have a what's called a stoma, a small hole in his throat. He couldn't smoke anymore, and yet here you see this guy through the course of the year puffing away. And I said to my wife, "That's impossible. How could he? How could he? Cut off his vocal cords or
Oh.
while smoking?" It was silly.
Oh.
By the way, tomorrow night they've been promoting this on Me TV on the nighttime. Perry Mason tomorrow night, I think, is one of the few cases. I think there's three of them where he actually lost a case.
Is that the one where what is the Julie Adams is found guilty at the beginning and sentenced to?
I'm not
That
sure.
must be. She's sentenced to the death
At night
the death penalty.
they're running 2 seasons behind. So this I think
Yeah,
is like
that would be the one then. That's the one that winds up being sentenced to death, and at the beginning to the death penalty, and
yeah,
Hamilton Burger is celebratory, and then Perry has to spend the entire episode figuring out who the real murderer is.
correct.
Oh,
He's
good.
trying to just like he's trying to figure out who the real murderer was for OJ.
Yeah. All right, so I guess we can call it a night. Well, you and I will be back tomorrow night, same bat time, same bat channel.
Yes, indeed, we'll be here.
And thank you very much again to Carl Weitz and Nick Cortez, both of you hitting super chat tonight. Joe and I do appreciate it. Also want to thank those that are watching from the meteorologist Joe Chaffee weather app, which is finally working and back to normal after being attacked last week. I feel like that's a badge of honor. That my app is so important now that they have to attack it. I don't know.
Anthony Orr just said breaking news: low near Florida suddenly given a 20% chance of development.
Oh, let's take a look. Hold on. Let's see what they're doing.
Breaking news.
Yes, they do have that little X there. So, yeah, Miami says widespread showers. They do analyze a weak low off the or the west coast, but the showers are pretty well disorganized. Weak surface low could form on the surface trough off the Florida east coast and move northward to South Carolina and Georgia on Tuesday. The low is not expected to become a tropical cyclone due to strong upper level winds. Yeah, so they give it a 20% chance.
Right.
The chances are low, so
Which is
we'll
better than no chance at all.
correct. So at this time tomorrow, we'll have a named storm, and that'll be that.
Yes.
All right. So you have a great evening, Mr. Rayo. We'll see you tomorrow. Everybody have a great night and a great week ahead. Hopefully, we'll see everybody tomorrow.